All right, another episode of Real Quick Python. More Python, less me talking. There's several ways to feed information or data or a file into a program. What you're looking at here is a program that I wrote that basically uses the premise of what is referred to as an indefinite loop. An indefinite loop, there's fundamentally two types of loops. One is a definite loop, the other is an indefinite loop. A definite loop is when it's easy to determine or fairly easy to determine how many iterations, how many times that loop is going to occur. An indefinite loop is when that is a little bit more difficult to determine. For example, if you are counting the number of cars in a parking lot, that's going to be a definite loop. You can easily determine, well, if there's 100 spaces, I can basically understand that at most there's going to be 100 cars. But if I'm counting the number of cars that are going past on a freeway for 15 minutes, that's going to be indefinite. And in Python and other programming languages, but for Python, a definite loop, we use a for statement. And in an indefinite loop, we use a while. I want to read in all the content of the book War and Peace. Let me click it up here. Yes, I can immediately go down to the bottom of this file and say, oh, do that. It's a big book. There's over 66,000 lines. 66,000 lines. Well, what if I don't have a program or an interpreter or anything that counts the number of lines for me? This would be the case where I would use an indefinite loop, where I'm going to run the loop. I'm going to iterate through this loop until I reach a certain condition. And that condition, going back to War and Peace, is whenever I hit the phrase on a line, EOF stands for end of file. So this video is more about the redirection of a file into another file. There's several ways for different programming languages to read other files. I want this program's called another underscore main. I want it to read in all the content associated with War and Peace. And one of the ways I can do that is I can run it from the command prompt. Let me clear my command prompt here. And I can run the program Python and run the program another main.py. But if you look inside the program, I have a couple input statements. I have an input statement here and an input statement here. If I run this program now, it's going to sit there and wait for me to physically type something at the keyboard. I'll do that, right? And I can just put junk in. My name's not junk. And it will sit there and it's going to iterate through until I eventually do an EOF. And then it's done. I can do the exact same thing by redirecting the input from a file over to this program. And what I can do, this is a common practice, especially in the Linux world. I can say Python, another main.py, and I'm going to say redirect, that's what the less than means, redirect the content of War and Peace.txt, this file. So what will happen is instead of the program waiting for me or the user to type something into the string, it's going to immediately go to the file and grab one line at a time. Every time it gets to this input statement, it's going to grab a line. So the top of the file, so as it's, as War and Peace is being pumped into another main, it's going to grab a line, right? It's going to determine if that line is a EOF. If not, it's going to take that line and it's going to append it to this list here. I created a list called content, and it's going to do that. It's going to iterate through the loop until it gets the EOF. Now, something important here. I have to have another input statement. If I don't give it another input statement, it's just going to loop through this in what's called an infinite loop. An infinite loop means there's no ending. But so I grab the very, very first line here. I check to see if it's an EOF. If it's not an EOF, it's going to take that line, it's going to put it into a list, then it's going to grab another line. Once it grabs that other line, it'll go back to the while, determine if it's an EOF. If it's not an EOF, it'll take that line, append it to the list, grab the next line, and then the next line, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then when I'm done, I basically will have a list of every line of War and Peace as an item or an element inside that list. Then I can do whatever I want with that list. This is this is an indefinite loop, basically saying go through the entire list. That's fairly easy for Python to do. Go through the entire list, grab a line, and if the word Petersburg is in that line, print the line. So let's run this program. Give it a second. War and Peace is a long book, 66,000 lines to it for on the Python side. And now if you look at what was outputted, every one of the lines has the word Petersburg in it. But not so much about going through War and Peace as it's going through, it goes through an entire file. I redirected that file into the Python program. That's what this did. Redirect the input from War and Peace, redirect it into here, and let this while loop, let this indefinite loop go through every line of that file, put every one of those lines in the file into the list. Once I build that list, I can do whatever I want with it. And in this little program, I basically went through the list. I did not go through the file again, that's only up here. I went through the list and it says, show me every element in the list that has the word Petersburg in it. So with that being said, let's go learn something.